For joining us today on this FAIR Institute sponsor webinar with our sponsor Cyber Vista. My name is Luke Bader. I am Director of Membership and Programs at the FAIR Institute. We like to do these sponsor webinars every so often with our different sponsors to bring in some of their expertise and knowledge to help our members, help them out with different subjects and topics that they want to talk about. Real quick, I do want to go over, though, just for people who are joining for the first time, a little bit of an update on the FAIR Institute. So as you may know, the FAIR Institute is a nonprofit expert organization that is dedicated to spreading the message of FAIR, which is a methodology to helping enable business-aligned and cost-effective risk management. We are just under 4,000 members now, and we're thinking that we're going to hit the 4,000 member mark in probably next week. We have 14 local chapters, and as recently as yesterday, we launched a federal government chapter in DC. So we're working with different people in different federal government agencies to help bring FAIR and risk quantification to their programs. We have a very extensive different work groups working on different subjects, and a great board of advisors with people coming from many different companies, Cisco, Bank of America, many CISOs like from Fannie Mae, the former CISO from the Federal Reserve, and many professors in academia helping us to spread the message. We currently offer FAIR-based university courses in 16 universities, and we're looking to double that next year. As I said earlier, our membership growth our member numbers are growing, and we're just under 4,000 members now. A lot of our members do the work for us. We have about half of our new members coming in from referrals or plain internet searches. So we have a very active and engaged member base that continues to spread the message of FAIR for us. And if we go to the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about what FAIR is. Oh, I'm sorry, before that, the partnership with the FAIR Institute and Cyber Vista was finalized earlier this year, and we're really excited to be partnering with this other educational community to help bring FAIR to people at the business executive level, management level, and the board level. And we're really proud to be partnering with Cyber Vista, and we're really happy that they have restructured their programs a little bit to include FAIR and to include risk quantification, and I'll let them speak on that more and in more depth in a little bit. Now I want to talk about what is FAIR exactly. So FAIR stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk, and it is the only international standard quantitative model for information security and operational risk. It is both a taxonomy and methodology for thinking through risk and managing risk in the financial terms of any organization. It is an agnostic model, can be used for cybersecurity and cyber-related incidences, as well as operational risk. And it is a complementary model to some of the existing frameworks like ISO and NIST and things like that. So where they tell you kind of what should be done, FAIR helps you talk about what level it should be done and what needs to happen first. And it is a standard of the Open Group. They took about 3 years to go through and standardize FAIR. And like I said, it is a way of thinking about risk, and it provides a common language for communicating about risk. Jack Jones, the author of the FAIR Institute, or the FAIR methodology and the chairman of the FAIR Institute, actually spoke yesterday at our chapter meeting and talked about how when he was a CISO at different organizations, he was able to, the first thing that he did when he went in there was made everybody become knowledgeable on FAIR, learn about it, and so that they were all speaking on the same plane. So it gives that window into this as well as an analytics framework too. So with that little preparation, I do want to hand it over to Jeff Welgan from Cyber Vista to run through their presentation. I know that we're going to be doing a Q&A session at the end, so welcome any questions about getting involved, signing up to become a member if you're not already, and the different resources that we have online. So thank you, and turn it over to Jeff.
Well, thanks, Luke, for the introduction and an overview of the FAIR Institute and our partnership with FAIR. We're very excited about our partnership with FAIR. Just a real quick about who we are and about me. I am the head of executive training programs at Cyber Vista. So I oversee our board and executive and other senior leadership risk, cyber risk training programs. Just a note about the Cyber Vista, though, we do service other parts of the community. So we do focus on cybersecurity certification, test prep for practitioners, and we also do skills-based training and workforce development training for folks on the practitioner side. So we often work with enterprises and train up teams and get them up to speed and up to capacity with the latest and greatest skill sets. We are a Graham Holdings company, and as you can see on the logo side, on the right-hand side, a list of logos. Those are all Graham Holdings companies, and we are a sister company of Kaplan. So we really spun out of the Kaplan business to focus specifically on cybersecurity workforce development and training. So if you have any questions about the other side of the business, the practitioner or certification side, please let me know after this webinar and we can answer those. But I'm going to be speaking to the higher level audience of the senior executive and how to champion FAIR to the board of directors and the C-suite. So my perspective really comes from not being a risk analyst, but doing cyber risk training to a high level audience and understanding what they are looking for from cyber risk, and then also informing them and educating them on the topic. So before we can actually talk about how to champion cyber FAIR to your board or to the C-suite or any other senior manager or even across business units, we really need to contextualize the challenge a little bit with regard to cyber risk. So currently there's what I call a confidence impact gap between senior leadership and the people who are responsible for actually doing information security work or looking at the risks associated with information security. So as you can see from the stats here, this is from the National Association of Corporate Directors, 59% of board directors find cyber risk very challenging to oversee. When you actually add in just challenging, that number goes up even further. They also believe that board directors spend not enough time on some sort of director education. So if we look kind of at those two numbers, we see a strong challenge, yet they're not getting educated or trained as much as they would like to on a variety of issues, cyber being one of those. And then lastly, only 12% of board directors actually are involved in the test of an incident response plan or some sort of a crisis plan with regard to cyber within a past year. So it's pretty low participation rate as well. When we look at ISACA, some reporting from ISACA down at the managerial level, we see about 92% of leaders think that IT governance actually leads to better economic outcomes. So if we're governing this area right, we can actually do better for our business. And then there's a large component that also think that senior leaders need to establish a clear connection between the business and the IT goals. And that kind of drives to some of the stuff that we can do with FAIR and why FAIR is a really important part of an important model to adopt or to utilize when we're talking to senior level audiences. So that's kind of on the confidence side. But when we look at impacts, the impacts are staggering, right? If we look at the average cost of a U.S. data breach is over $7 million across all industries. If you're in a healthcare, that number drastically goes up. The cost per record is very high. And one of the biggest loss factors following a breach is actually around lost business costs. So a big part of the impact is actually in how many customers you lose and what that does to your bottom line from the actual abnormal churn of customers. So this kind of begs the question, why is cyber risk and cybersecurity such a challenge to board directors, senior executives, and other managers, non-practitioners? And it really kind of comes down to a couple of things. Number one, there's a rapid rate of technology change, right? Every year, new technology comes out, whether that's on how you store information, how we communicate, other applications. There's also new technology around defenses and cybersecurity. It's really hard to keep up with that, as well as the threat landscape and how adversaries and people are using certain technology to enhance their abilities to cause harm. And the second reason, and this is probably the bigger reason, is that it's really being communicated the wrong way to senior executives. So when we talk about cyber risk, we like to use the analogy of a car. We like to think about cybersecurity like it's the brakes on a car. And everyone thinks that brakes were designed to slow cars down. And there's some truth to that. And that's kind of how organizations look at, information security teams. They slow an organization down. But the reality is that brakes are actually a control that are put on cars so that cars can drive faster. So the whole point of our programming and our education and training program around cyber risk is that we want to empower senior leaders to get behind the wheel, feel really confident behind that wheel, and then drive their cars down the road of success as fast and as safely as possible while recognizing certain dangers that are along the road. Seeing a curve that comes up, apply the brakes where needed, and then accelerate out with some sort of professional proficiency. So we have a couple main themes that we integrate into our cyber risk training, right? Number one is cybersecurity, cyber risk starts at the top. The senior leadership have a role to play. They have ownership over this issue. So they need to see that they have a place with regard to this. The second one is that cyber risk really is an enterprise risk issue. It can't be viewed as just a siloed issue that the IT team or information security team just take care of in its own silo. It impacts other parts of the business, and that is really one of the things that FAIR opens your eyes to, is just how impactful some of these risk scenarios, if you run them, can impact other parts of the business on your operations or just your compliance costs, etc. The third key piece is that it is a people problem, which is challenging in some ways because people are hard to manage, but we're used to managing people. We're used to training people. That is a problem that we can tackle more confidently than just kind of thinking in the obscure of it's just some technology or it's an adversarial problem or anything like that. And even when we look at adversaries and their use of technology, at the end of the day, they're people too, and they have motivations for the actions that they take. So if you can understand both components of that coin, what we do on our end as an organization versus what an adversary does on their end, it really gives us better insight into the challenge. And then lastly, and this is really where FAIR comes in, is that cyber risk is measurable, and because it's measurable, we can manage it. So that's the fourth and one of the most critical key themes of our overall training program. So I've got three main steps here to how to champion FAIR to your board and C-suite based on experience of presenting to board directors around cyber risk and C-suite executives. And step one is really to simplify the problem, right? When we look at the simplification process, most of us are familiar with the concept of an MVP, right? Minimally viable product. Whenever you create an MVP, you want to get it out there, get some feedback, and not build this huge thing before you understand how it works or how your customers react to it or utilize it. When we're talking about FAIR and championing FAIR for an executive audience, you want to kind of like take that MVP process but flip it into an MV, what I call an MVE, minimally viable explanation. So you want to focus your messaging on impactful strategic points when explaining it to senior level audiences. So here's a list of a couple of those, right? You can say that FAIR is the leading quantification model for cyber risk. That's great. It's a leader in the field. That's something that's going to resonate and check a box for the senior executive. It's able to translate bits and bytes into dollars and cents. Dollars and cents is something they are familiar with. They manage money all the time. They're comfortable in that area. They're not comfortable in technical jargon. So what FAIR does exactly that. Translates the technical into something that's manageable for them. The third thing is that it is an established and trusted model, right? It's been around since 2001, and this means something to executives. This is not something that's just brand new off the block and it's not tested out yet. This has been around for a while, and it's been adopted by a lot of organizations. So that checks the box for some trust, as well as this next bullet around being internationally accredited by the Open Group. And Luke just talked about that a little bit ago. Another really big point to make, especially if you are not in the Fortune 100 or not in the 500, is that you can mention that this model has been integrated and used by already over 30% of the Fortune 100. So big brands, big companies are using this to improve their insights into cyber risk and make more effective decision making. And then lastly, it is supported by the FAIR Institute, this growing community of risk professionals. So there's a support community behind it that's active and engaged, so we always get the best knowledge, and that is helpful for any organization who's implementing it and driving success. So along this line and this theme of driving your organization down the road to success, and cybersecurity is like the brakes on a car. One of the things that you really want to do when you're thinking about an MVE, if you're already using FAIR, you need to resist the urge to geek out on it. As members of the community, we all love the model, and we can really get involved in very complicated conversations about Monte Carlo and all those great things that make this model a success. But for an executive, they don't always need to open up the hood, right? They're driving the car. So they don't actually need to know how the engine works and how to fix it and all the mechanics of the engine. They just need to understand where's the gas pedal, where's the steering wheel, where's the brake pedal, and how can I shift this into drive. They really just need to know the basics, right? So when we look at this, the FAIR model itself, the FAIR model is fantastic, and that's the level of knowledge you need to make this car, air quoting, operational, right? This is the analytic side of the house. But when we look at the executive side of the house, you can simplify this model down to something very easy to explain to them and simplified. It's ultimately what happens. Cyber risk is what happens when a threat comes into contact with an asset, taking into account controls that are in place, and then that risk scenario has some sort of business impact, i.e. financial loss for the organization. And we can simplify the messaging to them where they don't want to pick apart everything or ask a ton of questions, along with all the key points that we went over in a couple slides ago. That really resonates with them without a whole lot of pushback on what you're doing and why you're doing it and why this specific model. So one of the beautiful things about the model is that FAIR, when you're talking to an executive level audience, allows you to do two very unique and specific things for executives. On the tactical side, you can look at any single risk scenario and provide really discrete details on those scenarios. What happens when an insider threat gets into this database, exfils it, and it's out in the wild and it has whatever kind of impacts, right? We can talk discretely on the operational and the loss factors with that specific scenario. But it also allows us to get to the strategic picture, the picture that they want to look at most times, right? The accumulation of a bunch of different risk scenarios and how that ties into our overall cyber risk and cyber maturity. So that's what's one of the really great things about the model, and we'll talk a little bit more about how simplicity ties into our next step when we're looking at a number of scenarios together to paint a larger, broader picture of what is the overall cyber risk for the organization. So that leads us to step 2. You need to be able to visualize your risk. So when we're talking about visualize, we're not talking about visualizing the end goal in mind, although that is very helpful. We're actually talking about visualizing data to help communicate, right? Because one of the challenges I discussed earlier was that there's this gap in the confidence and impacts, and a lack of knowledge, a lack of education, and a lack of ability for senior information security leaders to be able to communicate those bits and bytes into dollars and cents in board speak. So when we look at how to visualize your FAIR program or any kind of information security risk, that's where the dashboard really comes into play, right? This is one of your primary communication modalities that you're going to have to be able to show your successes and explain what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. And FAIR is a necessary component to that process, and we'll talk about that in a minute. When we look at dashboards, and more organizations are adopting some sort of cyber risk dashboard, but every single organization has a financial dashboard, and that's because they want to visualize what the income's like, what the revenue's like, where they're going from quarter to quarter. It helps just to visualize actual numbers onto some sort of graph. Unfortunately, not all organizations are doing this with cyber risk. But having a dashboard really does provide some key insights, including where you're successful in your program. What are some potential risk areas that need some attention, right? What areas in our organization and our cybersecurity program are we deficient that we really need some help in and improvements on? one of the big things for senior executives. It shows us where there might be some compliance issues, and how can we address those certain compliance issues. It also empowers you to show areas where you might need some investment. It gives you data to back up some requests around technology or people or programs that may be useful to your overall cybersecurity program. And lastly, it can also show you, or your senior executives, what areas are you working on? What are the major initiatives that you want to undertake to improve your cyber risk and be more resilient for the organization? So, as I mentioned before, it really does help prioritize your efforts by looking at return on investment when you're comparing it to loss, and then it helps you properly justify budgets. Where should you be spending your limited amount of money to make the most impact on the organization? And oftentimes, for organizations who haven't adopted FAIR, there are perceptions that the investment would be more helpful in this area over here rather than a completely separate area where they really actually do need some help, and the investment would actually have a better impact on the organization by reducing losses if we were to invest that other area. So it does help you prioritize in that way. And I should mention at any time during this webinar, if you have any questions, please chat them in here. I see a couple questions coming in or some comments. I've got a couple folks here in the room with me who can help address those, and they'll ping me if there's something I need to do out loud here. So when we look at dashboards, we know that they are a primary mode of communication for senior business leaders. But there are some things you want to keep in mind whenever you're putting these in front of a senior executive audience. And some of you have probably gone through this process. One of the key points is that it will help senior executives, board members, do proper due diligence. It helps them do their job better when they have that insight and can actually see what areas need a little bit more governance, or on the executive side, which areas need some more managerial input. It's also really important to know that your dashboard is going to be scrutinized. So you need to develop it in a way that's going to be effective for the organization, but also the people in the organization who are looking at it. So know that this is an iterative process. You just need to continually build upon it, but you really need to use numbers, quantitative data to back up what you're reporting and showing to the board. If you're just doing a stoplight chart with no real data behind it, and it's just gut feeling or some sort of qualitative assessment, that's not really useful when the board starts asking you a bunch of very pointed questions about the program or those issues. So when you iterate and you start making some improvements on it, your dashboards are actually going to help you build trust and credibility with the C-suite and board of directors. And that's an ultimate goal of ours at CyberVista, is we really want to empower information security leaders and other managers in actually tackling this particular problem set, cyber risk, in a teamwork-like environment where everybody's on the same page and everybody's moving forward in the same direction. So what are some quick best practices? Let's look at some of the pitfalls to avoid first. Oftentimes we see organizations prepare rather than do. You can have a tendency whenever you're going to start a dashboard to sit back for a while and come up with this great elaborate plan about here's what we're going to put, here's how it's going to look, etc. It's better just to get some data together and start taking action, and take action now. Second is you can do we have a question? Okay, what's the question? Okay, so operational risk AMA model is a failure. Why would this approach work this time? What are the differences against modeling diverse operational risk losses versus the diverse cyber risk environment? Hey, Luke, do you have any thoughts on that particular question?
What are the differences? The difference really just comes in from what the event is, what the event attacking a threat event, whatever the threat event is attacking whatever asset you have. So it's all based off of what your full risk scenario is. What are the differences against modeling? But other than that, there really is no difference of FAIR. As I said earlier, it is an agnostic model, so it can be applied to any risk scenario, cyber, ops risk, um, or anything else you can come up with. And we do have a couple different resources on there that will explain the difference on our resource library on Link. We have a couple different white papers on specifically ops risk or specifically cyber, and we actually just released a blog today of our presentation, our operational risk presentation from our past conference in October. So I would definitely check that out to hear about the differences of use.
Great, thanks, Luke, for taking that. Okay, moving on here. Another one of the pitfalls to avoid is to create barriers and not results, right? Oftentimes when you're implementing some sort of dashboard, you can create some unintended barriers. Sometimes this comes in the form of those who may be supporting you in that effort and their hesitation to actually take action and do, right? We're adding work to the process, even though it's for the betterment of the organization. And so you want to be mindful of those barriers that could be created. And then again, you really want to avoid the qualitative assessments. The high, medium, low is too subjective, and it doesn't do you very good. You may understand what that means for yourself, but the person next to you may not have the same perception, and ultimately it's not driven by any real data. So you really want to avoid those. Some of the key ingredients, though, you want it to be understood by everybody, and that's really focuses on the taxonomy. And again, one of the benefits of FAIR is that it gets everybody on the same page with regard to the vocab, the taxonomy, the lexicon, and that's why it was really important for us at CyberVista to integrate FAIR and all of its components into our curriculum to help drive this common understanding across the organization. The second thing, you want to have a committed team, and we'll talk about how to get some buy-in from some of your peers. But without a committed team, it's going to be a lot of extra work to do a dashboard. Another key piece is you really want to get some momentum going. This kind of goes back to the pitfall of over gathering samples or just preparing too much. You want to start somewhere, make some successes, and then keep pushing forward. And then as you get some successes and move forward, you can start scaling out as appropriate. Ultimately, the dashboard should be helping the organization drive towards its desired business goals. So you want to keep those business goals in mind. You need to really communicate with the executive team on what their strategic vision is, what their KPIs are, what the goals are from the organization, and help reinforce those. You need to use, for looking at quantitative metrics, the way to get to that is actually by looking at cyber risk scenarios, and this is where the FAIR model again comes into play, is that you need to have discrete scenarios to understand the actual risks that are out there. This will help you quantify your cyber risk, which also translates that risk into some sort of loss, right? Dollars and cents. This way we can understand what controls could be put in place to reduce the loss impacts. Okay, so when we're looking at reporting some of your cyber risk, there are a couple of factors why organizations regularly fail. One is this over-reliance on qualitative metrics, and we talked about that. The second one is the ineffective communications between the CISO, the C-suite, and the board of directors, right? The CISO may have trouble communicating some of the technical components of the programs that are in place with a non-technical or non-practitioner audience. So this is really where that threading of financial loss and that translation comes into place. And also simple analogies and simple, commonly understood lexicon will help with that communications process. And we can't ignore culture either. Culture is really, really hard to change. So whenever you're going to implement anything new, let alone a whole new model into your organization, it is going to take some time to change the mindset and change the culture around it. On the plus side, senior executives and board directors like better transparency over programs, and they like numbers, so that is a big plus, and it's something you can use to your advantage when you're saying, hey, we're going to start talking about our cyber risk and in terms of metrics, real measurable metrics, and financial losses. That will help you, but you may time after time come up to against individuals or across the entire company where they'll say things like, well, we've always done it this way and we like this way. They're sitting very comfortable in a potentially outdated way or inaccurate way to look at certain information. So FAIR will help move the needle forward on every single one of these big top 3 factors. So I'll give you an example of a less than ideal situation that I did in one of my training programs for, I won't mention any names, but for a telecoms company, and they definitely have brand recognition. When I went out there and we were talking about dashboards and how we're reporting cyber risk up to the board of directors, they mentioned that they were aligning everything with the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is fantastic. And NIST is great, and we love NIST. But we have to keep in mind that cybersecurity frameworks aren't really designed to model or visualize cyber risk, right? So if you lean too much on the cybersecurity framework to display or communicate that risk, it may not be that effective. So just to give you an example, the dashboard, and I'm kind of air quoting that as well, that this information security team was presenting to the board looked like this. And I scrubbed the name and from the dashboard to just be something generic like GenCore. And as you can see here, it maps to NIST, right? You got identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. This means something, right, for information security professionals when they're looking at all the things that go into the framework. But when you're actually looking at this from a dashboard perspective, it doesn't, I mean, they have some thresholds here, and you can kind of see that, respond might be a little bit worse off than protect, but you really don't understand anything that's in this. They're just kind of, what the board was kind of looking at when they're looking at this, they wanted everything green, or at least, in the yellow zone. But they can't ask smart questions based on this. They can say, well, why is respond so high? And I think you get some technical questions on why it's respond, but it doesn't really drive them towards any kind of effective decision making around what can be done to reduce that risk. Now, the information security leader probably has some ideas, but we're still creating this huge gap of lack of governance and oversight where the board can have some input on those areas. So the key thing to take away here is that cybersecurity framework is useful for showing control gaps, but it does not effectively measure risk, right? So based on a number of engagements with Fortune 500 clients and board directors and senior executives, here's what we put together for what an ideal type of cyber risk dashboard could look like. And this is not prescriptive by any means, and I will note that this is for illustrative purposes. We do not do, CyberVista does not do dashboarding services or products. We can point you to the direction of a couple great folks who do great dashboards like RiskLens. But based on some feedback from those clients, this is kind of an illustrative look at a dashboard that would make sense to them. So we'll go through a couple key elements here. The first one is that risks are divided up into strategic categories, right? So 5 to 7 strategic categories. And it could be anything from like culture and capability to data integrity and protection to third-party risks and due diligence. Big categories that they really understand the concepts of, right? The other key piece of this dashboard is that there are defined risk thresholds. So we're quantifying the thresholds, we're identifying what's high, medium, and low. So there is a number behind the color coding on this particular dashboard. And those thresholds vary for each of these categories. So your thresholds for culture and capability will be something different than they are, or can be something different than they are for the legal and regulatory compliance category, because their tolerance may be different for each scenarios and overall risk areas. Another one of the most critical components of the program or dashboard is that it has to be quantified And one of the beautiful things about FAIR is that you can quantify those risk scenarios, and those risk scenarios can then be aggregated to filter up into one of these big key themes or strategic categories like culture and capability. And it should show the trend, right? You want to show, are we improving? Are we not improving over time? Even though there's a jump, we still may be overall improving our program based on the trend line. So which leads us to the next part of that trending. You need to track it across time. So in this view, we're just doing a recap view of what the year looks like from Q1 to Q4. And maybe some notes about why certain things were high or low or whatnot, right? You might have a big jump in your data because you had an acquisition, right? If you're looking at culture and capability and there's that big jump on there, I'll go back real quick. This big jump on the A category where the risk is much higher and it's above the threshold, that tells the board or senior management they should be asking some questions about that particular data point. Why did that jump up? So when you're quantifying it and tracking over time, they can say, well, we just acquired a brand new company, an India-based company. There's 10,000 people, and they don't go through cybersecurity awareness training. So our risk and culture and capability has just now skyrocketed for this quarter. Then you can follow up with, we have a plan in your notes to roll out cybersecurity training and get everybody compliant with that annual training program. We kind of go back. And then the last thing, one of the last key components of any good dashboard is, what do you want to work on? What are the major initiatives? And these major initiatives should align back to the data, right? Why are we going to implement a program? Well, there's a program that needs some cybersecurity awareness training based on that acquisition. So this is going to be one of our new major initiatives, whether that's awareness training or DLP or you're migrating to the cloud, whatever it may be. This gives you the reasoning behind those decisions, and you can back up those decisions based on the FAIR model and the loss expectancies. Okay, so this leads us to our final and third step. And this one's actually kind of short, and we'll open up to questions here in just a moment. So the third one is to harmonize, right? You want to get your senior executives and your board to work in harmony with you around cyber risk. And this is really hard to do. This really starts driving at that culture piece, but it can be done. There's a lot of really great organizations, really great CISOs who have begun to harmonize well with their board. So you really want them to look at a couple of things here. To harmonize, you may need to start really small. If you don't already have FAIR already integrated in your program or plan to do it, if you're bringing it on board, you're going to want to start small and build upon those successes. It's kind of similar to that key point in the dashboarding process, is that you want to build momentum, but you don't want to try to tackle the whole ocean at the same time. Another really key piece is knowing your audience and speaking to what motivates them, right? You have to know the difference between your presentation style and your messaging when you're talking to the board of directors versus the audit committee versus your C-suite. Or even if you're a risk analyst, what the audience may be to fellow peers in different business units. You really need to know who your audience is and speak to the things that really concern them or motivate them. You can get their buy-in and make some traction on an individual level. And this is where you can start winning over influencers, right? You should be looking at your organization and those who have higher roles or responsibilities than yourself to say, who would be an influencer that I can bring on board and try to make a champion of what I'm doing and of this program. So you want to work with them, find out what's really makes them tick, see if there are any specific problems or challenges that they see, and maybe collaborate with them on a small scale to implement and show how FAIR can address those challenges or concerns. You also really want to get a great personal, professional relationship with your senior executives. So if you're again, a CISO, and you have the privilege of being the one who actually gets to report to the board, you may want to try to find time to get one-on-one time with them. See if you can build a rapport with them. Maybe have a coffee outside of the boardroom or dinner if you're lucky. Get to know them on a personal level. This will help you build trust with them, but also it'll give you the opportunity to talk a little bit more about those engine components that maybe would help put FAIR and the cybersecurity training programs, or I'm sorry, cybersecurity program that you have in place, why those things are really important. If you don't have the privilege of getting board time, do it with your executive team. If you're a risk analyst, do it with peer analysts. Find other people in the HR department or operations. Build relationships with someone above you so that they can help you along that process and give you the opportunity and platform to elaborate more and champion FAIR for yourself. Again, collaborate on those top of mind risks, right? Understand what makes them tick. For the board, for a certain organization, it might be compliance things. So you might want to find a small data set that allows you to utilize FAIR, implement that model across compliance related issues. And then again, make those continual and iterative improvements to the program. And then strive to be a center of excellence, both internally and across your peer groups. We've seen organizations who have implemented FAIR be internal centers of excellence, where other business units are coming to them and asking about how they model data, how are they looking at this, and how they can help those other business units implement FAIR and do something very similar. But you also, as you kind of build your own internal successes, you should think a little bit bigger. How can you be a center of excellence for your industry and industry peer groups? If you're in the healthcare industry and you're implementing FAIR and you're doing a really good job at it, strive to get recognition for that by talking about it with those peer groups, or whether it's at a conference or a working session or any kind of chapter meeting that you may be involved in. Work to get that recognition. The recognition will not only look good for you in driving your success, but it'll also be really great reflective success for the organization, which in turn will make the board of directors, senior executives really happy that you're doing something that is being recognized as a best practice. And then lastly, you need to educate business leaders on cyber risk. Whether you're doing that internally or through someone like us at CyberVista, people need to understand more around this risk area. If you don't actually understand it, they're more hesitant to even hear you explain it. And the reality of it is that cyber risk isn't all that scary. It doesn't have to be technical. It doesn't have to be detailed. And getting over that hurdle with senior executives and directors is sometimes challenging, but once you kind of peel it back a little bit, they realize that this is enterprise risk. This is not necessarily cyber risk. It's enterprise risk, and I can manage enterprise risk very effectively because it impacts my operations, it impacts my financial statements, it impacts our reputation. That's the way to kind of move success forward, is really getting everybody on the same page and under the same understanding that you have around this particular risk area. So tying into that program, at the end of this webinar here, we really value our program. We've seen it be very effective across a number of clients and individuals, and we want to give you the opportunity to take a look at it as well. So for anybody who's live on this program, we want to give you access to a free trial of this program. This is something that's sold for $14.95. If you're just buying it for an individual, we'll give you access to a free trial for free. If you can just email me with your interest with the subject line "Resolve Trial," that would be helpful. I get a lot of emails, so that will definitely stand out to me. Or if you want to provide your name and email address in the chat box, we can pick it up from here and provision an account for you. So I'd ask you to do that in the next 24 hours or 2 business days if possible. We can definitely give you access to that. Take a look at it and evaluate it. See if it's something that's going to help you grease the skids a little bit in your own organization. Would this be a program that would be helpful for your senior executives? Would this be something that would help you communicate cyber risk up to your board. We believe it will, and we want to get your feedback on that as well. Okay, and I will open it up to questions in the chat box. Luke and I will try to tackle any questions you have. So we can give this a few minutes and try to address some of these questions. So Diane says, are there emerging frameworks for cost versus loss exposure reduction comparisons to support decisions? Luke, this kind of sounds like a good one for you since it deals with frameworks and cost loss stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Diane, and I know Steve had put this in there earlier. I have not heard of any emerging frameworks with that myself. That may be a question for somebody like Jack Jones to answer, who's much more up to date on new things coming up in the industry. If you're a member of the Fair Institute and have a profile on Link, I would suggest posting it up there in our discussion board for the rest of the membership to see, because maybe somebody knows something that I just am not aware of yet. But no, not to my knowledge. I can't speak to that.
Okay, you got Steve type in here and Josh, so we'll see what comes in. Okay,
I really would like to encourage everybody to definitely check out Link and our discussion boards on there, because there are some really good conversations happening both there and on LinkedIn. Steve, I know you're writing about a FairCon topic, and we're always open to people with topic ideas for presentations at the conference, at different chapter meetings around, for our webinar ideas. If you want to contribute to the blog, please reach out to me. Happy to connect you with our content manager and get a blog published. So we are really increasingly looking for and receiving information from our members about what they're working on. I just worked on publishing a new white paper up with a member from Australia on a different way to view his risk framework, his risk management framework. So we're always open to ideas and possibilities about getting more content in and more stuff. So yeah, feel free to, if you ever have any ideas, please let me know, and we'll get something figured out. And Josh, yes, the links to confirm for FairCon case study, extending FAIR to manage operational risk. Yes, that is correct. That is Christina Nelson from Walmart. She's one of their operational risk managers there, and the presentation was really, really great. And she's actually going to be co-chairing our operational risk work group that we're going to get restarted again in the beginning of the year. I just had a call with her last week, so look for more information about that as well.
Great, thanks for that, Luke. So I just want to make just an admin note. If you guys want to re-watch this or redirect anybody to this webinar, it is being recorded and will be available within 24 hours on our website. We can post a link. Also, be on the lookout for a post-webinar email that will come from us probably on Monday with some additional details and some promotion codes if you're looking to purchase this cyber risk training, or if you're looking for cybersecurity certifications, whether that's for yourself or for your enterprise team. We'll be offering some really great discounts to the folks on this webinar. So with that, I will thank you all for your attending and your attention. And Luke, thank you for helping to host. And we look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, everybody at CyberVista for being a sponsor of the FAIR Institute.
Great. Thank you, guys. Take care.